Order. Welcome to meeting number 64, the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance, pursuant to Standing Order 83.1 and the motion adopted on Wednesday, September 28th, 2022. The committee is meeting to discuss the pre-budget consultations in advance of the 2023 budget. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23rd, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefits of the witnesses and the members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating via video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raised hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. I'd now like to welcome our witnesses that are with us here today, and they're coming to us in person in the room or via video conference. From the Business Council of Canada, we have Robert Asselin, who's the Senior Vice President of Policy. Welcome. From the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, we have with us Franco Terrazzano, who's the Federal Director. From the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, we have Shimon Koffler-Fogel, who is the President and Chief Executive Officer. From Green Budget Coalition, we have Teresa McClenahan, who's the Executive Director of Canadian Environment Law Association, Tom L. Green, Senior Climate Policy Advisor for David Suzuki Foundation, and Andrew Van Itterson, who's a manager. From Info Electronics Systems, Inc., coming to us, I believe, from the West Coast. As we heard, we have Harinder Ahluwalia, who is the president of Info Electronic Systems, Inc. And from the Uni des Producteurs Agricoles, we have David Tugas, who's the coordinator of business and economics, and Martin Caron, who's the general president. We will start by for opening remarks, and it'll be up to 5 minutes for the witnesses for opening remarks with the Business Council of Canada. The floor is yours, Mr. Asselin.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mon nom est Robert Asselin. I'm Senior Vice President Policy at the Business Council of Canada. We represent the heads of 175 businesses employing over 2 million Canadians. I want to convey two simple messages to you today. The first relates to fiscal policy in perilous times. We are in the midst of the riskiest economic policy landscape we've seen in decades. Inflation remains stubbornly high, and the risk of policy mistake is increasing. This requires a change of direction on fiscal policy. As the recent events in the United Kingdom have shown us, misalignment between the Government of Canada and the central bank could cause unease in the bond market and raise the cost of borrowing inadvertently. Put simply, the more expansionary fiscal policy continues to be, the more difficult it will be for the central bank to do its job and bring inflation back to its mandated target range. It is generally accepted that as long as economic growth outpaces interest rates increases, the burden of servicing debt will fall over time. In the current economic environment, we can no longer assume this will be the case. When interest rates go up faster than growth, there's simply no easy way out. Debt financing becomes much more burdensome for taxpayers. Therefore, as former Bank of Canada Governor David Dodge has rightly suggested, we are of the view the government should adopt a new fiscal anchor based on debt servicing costs. It should commit to ensuring its debt service costs do not exceed 10% of annual government revenues going forward. The second message I want to convey to you is on our economic competitiveness. Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Chairman, we must look to the future without complacency. For too long, we've neglected our economic competitiveness. While the government has announced some measures that will help our economy in the last two budgets, we're still a long way off. The federal government still lacks a coherent plan for long-term growth and modern industrial policy that will make Canada more competitive.
Economy and Canada's largest trading partner now has a clear and bold industrial strategy for the first time since the Cold War. As such, Canadian policymakers need to acknowledge the real threat that the recent adoption of the Inflation Reduction Act, what is called the IRA, and the CHIPS and Science Act in the United States poses to our economic competitiveness. We are already hearing of projects moving to the US to take advantage of the IRA. To stay competitive, Canada needs an industrial strategy of its own with several key components. Although I don't have time to go through every component in this testimony, let me briefly emphasize on three essential ones. Number one, talent. In a recent survey of our members, 80% reporting having difficulty finding the skilled workers they need to grow and compete globally. As a result of these shortages, 67% had canceled or delayed major projects. Some 30% were forced to relocate work outside of Canada. With an aging workforce and a declining labor participation rate, Canada's future prosperity depends on change to our migration system to significantly increase the number of economic class applicants who are granted permanent resident status. Second, investments. Canadians must demonstrate to the world that we can successfully complete major projects and build the infrastructure that is required to access global markets. For such projects to go ahead, however, investors need regulatory predictability and a clear understanding of the rules of the road. We noted with interest the finance minister's recent speech at the Brookings Institutions, in which she committed the government to fast-track the energy and mining projects our allies need to heat their homes and to manufacture electric vehicles. We look forward to seeing more detail on this important and welcome initiative. Third, and my final point, is innovation. The new direction of U.S. industrial policy reflects a broader government intervention beyond R&D to support technological development from idea to market. In Canada, our capacity to undertake industrial research at scale is almost non-existent, and our technology transfer mechanism have not kept in pace with developments in knowledge creation. We still rely too heavily on incremental innovation or safe bets. Canada must become more competitive on technological innovation, and science must be translated into productivity growth and future prosperity. Merci de votre attention, Monsieur le Président.
Merci, Monsieur Haslin. And
Thank you very much, Mr. Haslin.
to the Canadian Taxpayers Federation for 5 minutes of opening remarks. Mr. Terrazzano.
You're going to hear from hundreds of individuals and groups asking for more money. My name is Franco Terrazzano. I'm with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, and I'm here on behalf of 235,000 Canadian taxpayers asking you to spend less. I'm here today to say no more spending $8,800 on a sex toy show in Germany, no more racking up nearly six figures on fancy airplane food during a week-long trip. No more giving former governors general a $200,000 a year expense account for the rest of their life. No more taking pay raise after pay raise after pay raise while millions of Canadians struggle through a pandemic. No more giving 300,000 bureaucrats a raise while their neighbors lose their job or business. No more giving failing crown corporations like the Bank of Canada millions in bonuses. No more announcing $295 million for the Ford Motor Company, $420 million for Algoma Steel, $12 million for Loblaws, $20 million for Maple Leaf Foods, $110 million for Toyota, or announcing $372 million for Bombardier. Canadians need real relief. But Canadians are paying too much tax because the government wastes too much money. No wonder 72% of Canadians say they pay too much tax, according to a recent Ipsos poll released last week. 51 other national governments have cut taxes during the pandemic or to ease the pain of inflation. That includes more than half of G7 and G20 countries. 2/3 of OECD countries have also cut taxes during that time. While other countries cut taxes, Ottawa sticks Canadians with higher tax bills. The government has increased gas taxes, payroll taxes, and alcohol taxes. The government is getting ready to impose a second carbon tax next year through fuel regulations. But Canadians cannot afford higher taxes, and we can't afford to waste more money covering interest charges on the government's credit card. The government isn't scheduled to balance the budget until 2041 under the current trajectory. That's according to recent PBO data. Interest charges over that period will have cost taxpayers $800 billion by 2041. That's a cost of $18,000 for every Canadian, and it's hundreds of billions of dollars that can't be used to improve services or lower taxes because that money is going to the bond fund managers on Bay Street. But there is some good news. The government could balance the budget next year. The government could also reverse its tax hikes, and the government could do that by bringing program spending back to the pre-pandemic and all-time high levels of 2018-19, adjusted upward for inflation and population growth. In 2018-19, the government spent more money than it did during any single year during World War II, even after accounting for inflation and population differences. That means the government overspent for years. So finding savings in every area of the budget should be like finding water in the ocean. Fortunately, we're now hearing the finance minister say that if politicians want to fund new programs and spend more money, they're going to have to find savings in other areas of the budget. And spending buckets of extra cash would only be pouring gasoline on the inflation fire. Now, we're sure that politicians of all parties would agree at least with some of the savings in the CTF's 80-page budget submission, and we're happy to work with you on that. Because Canadians are struggling, Canadians can't afford any more taxes, any more tax increases, and Canadians can't afford to waste more money on interest charges. Fortunately, the government can provide relief and balance the budget. It'll just take modest spending restraint. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Terrazzano. Well under time. And now we will move to the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, Shimon Koffler-Fogel, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and to all members of the committee for welcoming CIJA's participation in this important conversation. The Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, known as CIJA, is the advocacy agent of the Jewish Federations of Canada. We're a national, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization representing more than 150,000 Jews across the country, affiliated through their local federations from coast to coast. In my brief remarks, I'd like to focus on 3 things in particular. First is support for nonprofit social services. CIJA works closely with our partners at the network of Jewish Human Service Agencies across the country to advocate for nonprofit social services. These nonprofits provide assistance to both Jewish and non-Jewish Canadians, including people with both cognitive and physical disabilities, older adults, those facing mental health, substance abuse, and housing challenges, as well as refugees fleeing persecution. I think we all recognize that Canada's social service providers are in crisis. The pandemic increased demand on services across the board, and while many nonprofits were able to access emergency federal funding in the early months of the pandemic, this funding has been exhausted. Demand for services, however, has not slowed. Canada's nonprofits are struggling to hire, train, and retain the staff needed to function. Recent Stats Canada results of the Canadian Survey of Business Conditions report that 32% of nonprofit sector employers believe retaining skilled staff will be an obstacle over the next period, while 36% are concerned about recruiting skilled staff. This is exacerbated by the reality that average salaries in community nonprofits are already 35% lower than the economy-wide average in Canada. Current grant options, both on the federal and provincial levels, are limited in scope and availability and are usually focused on programming. Our recommendation is that the Government of Canada establish a national nonprofit strategy that will provide the multi-year support needed to stabilize the nonprofit sector. We also recommend that the government reintroduce emergency funding or through the CST direct support for nonprofit social services to address the short-term urgent capacity needs. Secondly, launching a community security trust to improve the SIP program. The Security Infrastructure Program is a key initiative that provides essential funds to institutions to enhance their security infrastructure. SIP provides funding to private and nonprofit organizations at risk of hate-motivated crime to mitigate the costs of security infrastructure improvements such as alarm systems and bollards. The efficacy and importance of this program has been well established over the last number of years. However, while the SIP provides essential infrastructure funding, it's only part of the solution. It's essential to empower, equip, and train community members to be aware, identify, and deter threats, and to have the capacity to partner effectively with law enforcement, which in most cities is stretched beyond capacity and can therefore offer limited on-site support. Moreover, at-risk communities need to feel a sense of ownership rather than feelings of victimhood and vulnerability. Our recommendation is that the Government of Canada fund a pilot project to complement SIP, giving communities the capacity to deter threats and assume some responsibility for protection of their communal institutions and users. Finally, government resources to implement the new anti-racism strategy. We at CIJA are deeply concerned by the situation in which funds from Canadian Heritage's Anti-Racism Action Program were directed to an organization that gave a platform to someone who publicly made statements of the vilest anti-Semitic content for years. And while we are grateful and pleased that Minister Hussen and the government have promised and acted on a review and renewal of Canada's anti-racism strategy, this was not an isolated incident. Our concern is that insufficient resources are being committed to actually address and educate on anti-Semitism and racism within the government departments relevant, especially for those tasked with vetting funding recipients. Our recommendation is that the Government of Canada provide dedicated funding and work with community stakeholders to ensure that government funding never again goes to an organization that promotes anti-Semitism and racism in general. This funding should include education on anti-Semitism for government decision-makers, a genuine and measurable implementation of the IHRA definition already adopted by the government, and continued funding for the Office of Canada's Special Envoy on preserving Holocaust remembrance and combating anti-Semitism. Finally, Mr. Chair, although we eagerly anticipate the new legislation to deal with online hate and harms that both Heritage and Justice are working on, there is another dimension we feel is urgently needed. We believe that a social media literacy campaign has to be undertaken. Our view is that hardcore haters represent a minority of Canadians. Those who would use social media to foment, disseminate, and foster hate, or use online platforms to incite violence are beyond rehabilitation. Most Canadians, however, engage in such activities or amplify such messages out of ignorance, not being sensitive to what these messages represent. The path to sensitizing people to what hate looks like online, what forms it takes, and what to do about it flows through education. We have to undertake a national social media literacy campaign to sensitize Canadians, especially the younger, more vulnerable demographic, about the appropriate use of and abuse of social media. Mindful of time, Mr. Chair, I will leave my comments there, and thank you again for inviting us to participate. I invite any comments or questions.
Thank you, Mr. Koffler-Fogel. There will be a lot of opportunity for questions from members. I'm sure they're looking forward to that. Now we're going to hear from the Green Budget Coalition. We have two of the members via video conference and one, I believe, in person, clerk. And for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Thank you for inviting the Green Budget Coalition to speak to you today. The Green Budget Coalition, active since 1999, is unique in bringing together the expertise of 21 of Canada's leading environmental organizations, collectively with over 1 million Canadians as members, supporters, and volunteers. The Green Budget Coalition's mission is to present an analysis of the most pressing issues regarding environmental sustainability in Canada and to make a consolidated annual set of recommendations to the federal government regarding strategic fiscal and budgetary opportunities. As the chair mentioned, I'm pleased to be joined today by three of my expert colleagues to help answer your questions. The Coalition's co-chair, Teresa McClenaghan, with the Canadian Environmental Law Association, based in Toronto and Paris in southwestern Ontario. The Coalition's climate lead, Tom Green, with the David Suzuki Foundation in Vancouver. And Sean MacArthur beside me, the Associate Director of Government Relations with Nature United from Madame Chatel's riding in Quebec. Yesterday, I emailed you each the Green Budget Coalition's submission to the committee's pre-budget consultations, as well as links to this detailed document here in English and French, which is the Coalition's detailed recommendations for Budget 2023 with more detail. Overall, as the world continues to grapple with major crises, including Hurricane Fiona's recent impacts on Canadians on the East Coast and energy shortages in Europe, the Green Budget Coalition believes it is now critical to focus more attention on the related climate and biodiversity crises and shaping a world that is equitable, carbon neutral, and nature positive, and provides secure, affordable energy for current and future generations of people, Canadians and people worldwide. The Coalition welcomed the federal government's multi-billion-dollar investments in Budget 2022 that advanced the Coalition's recommendations, particularly for energy-efficient buildings, zero-emission vehicles, and nature-based climate solutions. However, as we've seen, much more is needed. The upcoming UN meetings on climate in Egypt in a couple weeks, and then on nature in Montreal in December, are prime opportunities for the government to announce such new investments, to demonstrate global leadership, and to inspire further action by our international partners. In this context, the Green Budget Coalition has 5 feature recommendations for Budget 2023, which will create jobs, enhance affordability by reducing energy costs, and also support Indigenous leadership and well-being. So firstly, advancing a zero-emissions electricity grid based on renewables, essential steps towards the major transformational investments required in the generation, transmission, and demand side of electricity, including remote Indigenous communities, an investment of $18 billion over 5 years. Secondly, the renovation wave, following on the model in the European Union, a plan for jobs and climate, upgrading the energy efficiency and comfort of Canada's residential building stock across the country, including low-income households, Indigenous communities, and skills development for the retrofit economy. Thirdly, delivering on Canada's land and ocean protection commitments, integrating Indigenous-led conservation, permanent funding for protection and stewardship, ecological connectivity, and NGO collaboration. Fourth, advancing sustainable agriculture, recommendations to help producers and Canada be leaders in sustainable and innovative agriculture with a resilient and diversified food system. And fifth, building capacity to ensure environmental justice for Canadians, establishing an Office of Environmental Justice and committing an appropriate portion of benefits from climate and clean energy spending to disadvantaged communities following the U.S. Justice 40 example. Lastly, in our document, we also outline a number of complementary recommendations regarding climate mitigation and adaptation, nature conservation, environmental justice, environmental and human health, fresh water, reducing damaging subsidies, and other important issues. Implementing these recommendations together would lead to dramatic progress in advancing a healthier future for Canadians from coast to coast to coast. So to conclude, I would like to thank you again for inviting the Green Budget Coalition to appear here today, and we look forward to your comments and questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Van Ittersen. And I have to say, Ms. McClenaghan, that my wife and her family are from Paris, Ontario. Just wanted to let you know that. Small
Amazing.
town, yeah. And so we are now going to go actually to the West Coast via video conference, and we have from Info Electronic Systems, Mr. Alawalia, for 5 minutes, please. Mr. Alawalia, you may be on mute. You're on mute. Yeah.
I said, actually, I'm from Montreal, not West Coast.
Oh,
But,
sorry. I thought, you know what? When you said it was raining, I just thought West Coast right away.
No. Okay, it's
my
not really
my
in
apologies to the West
No
Coast.
problem.
Okay.
But no problem.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. No, I'm teasing.
Montreal, yeah.
Okay, so
Mr. Alawalia
I'll
from
be-
Montreal. 5 minutes, please.
I'll be
Thank you.
speaking about 2 points. One is how we should invest in the foreign aid, which is already budgeted, but the way it should be spent. And the second point is about boosting our economy by strengthening our small and medium high-tech enterprises. The first one is at the 2021 G7 Leaders Summit, Canada announced a doubling of its international climate finance commitment to $5.3 billion over the next 5 years. And this was announced for improving the energy systems and trying to reduce the greenhouse gases. The problem is that as far as developing countries, especially Africa, for example, introduces only 3 to 5% of greenhouse gases. So if we are helping them for that, it is for the future. But today's need for them is really safety because of all the problems which are being caused by global warming and climate change. So I believe that part of that money should go towards safety. Now, the safety means building capacity in Africa and other least developed countries. Safety means infrastructure. Safety means early warning systems so that they can save their lives and property. I have recommended in my brief, written brief, that this should be done in really a different way. I have already met the International Aid Minister, Minister Sajjan, and will be meeting the Environment Minister as well as the NRCar Minister about those topics. I believe that assistance to the international community should be provided in a proper targeted way and not like because everybody else is doing one way, we should follow the same way. We should be the leaders in this. And to be the leaders, there are organizations which are national meteorological societies, International Forum of Meteorological Society. These are all volunteer-based organizations worldwide and trying to create capacity. So we should be supporting such organizations. I'm the president of International Forum of Meteorological Society, which unites all the national meteorological societies of the world. And we are trying to create capacity. I spent half my life on doing that without any compensation at all. So most of the people who are working there are all spending their own money, and therefore we should support them so that they are successful. Number two is the pet peeve, which is the way Canada is supporting its high-tech SMEs is really not the right way. There are some good things, but there should be a different direction. There should be no development within the government, and the industry should be given contracts to work, especially in environmental areas where most of the industry is dependent upon the government projects. Therefore, there should be no in-house development, and all the development should be, or most of the development should be done by industry. This way, we'll be strengthening our small and medium high-tech enterprises. And I believe that in order to do that, we need to have a conference where the government people, which includes politicians as well as bureaucrats and high-tech industry people, they all get together and discuss what really is required to increase our economic output. A lot of people complain that we are overspending, but I am trying to suggest that there are ways to create more wealth. And that is where I would like to help Canada. And this is a sure way of creating wealth. And the first one, sure way of creating capacity in developing countries and least developed countries. We do that all the time just to ensure that money is spent in the right direction. I request Government of Canada to really be the leader in this. Thank you very much. I appreciate being able to present my opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Ahluwalia, and coming to us from beautiful Montreal. We are now going to hear from our witness, the Union des Producteurs Agricoles. And we have Mr. David Tougas and Martin Caron for 5 minutes, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My name is Martin Caron, General President of the UPA. It's a dairy and field crop producer. We're going to lead with 4 themes: resilience of the ag sector, agri-environmental and organic production, the tax system for the agricultural and forestry area, and support for the dairy sector. First of all, it's important to remember that the agri-food sector employs 2.1 million people in 2021 and represents 1 in 9 jobs in Canada, which adds $135 billion, about 6.8% to the country's GDP. In addition, Canada exported about $82.2 billion in agriculture and food products, including raw materials, fish, seafood, and processed food. Canada is the 5th largest exporter of agri-food and seafood production in the world. Despite the sector's strong performance, it's been particularly affected by inflation, particularly since 2021. Farm inputs have increased by 25% in cost between the first quarter of 2020, start of the pandemic, and the second quarter, the latest available data, according to Stats Canada. The major production inputs, food, fertilizer, fuel, experienced price increases much higher than the consumer price index. Even in horticulture, the price of containers has increased significantly. In addition, in eastern Canada, which relies more heavily on imported fertilizers, the punitive 35% tax imposed on Russian fertilizers has not only increased the cost of herbicide, but weakened their availability. Simultaneously, agricultural enterprises have had to invest massively in recent years in order to comply with societal expectations regarding environment and animal welfare. These elements have resulted in a doubling of our sector's debt in this period. 1% increase in interest rates will ultimately result in $1.2 billion in additional interest expense for Canadian farm businesses. This represents 25% of the sector's total net income in 2021. When you consider that the prime rate in Canada has increased by 3% since the beginning of the year, you can imagine the tremendous pressure that it puts on agricultural producers. In this context, considering the essential nature of agriculture for food security.
Can you move the boom on your mic so between your nose and your mouth, please?
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dans ce contexte.
Okay. In this context, given the important, particularly in the Canadian situation right now, we should limit those inflationist pretexts and put into place a special assistance program specific to agricultural sector to limit the impact of inflation on financial health of agricultural businesses and enhance the Agri-Stability Program by increasing its coverage rate to 85% of the reference margin while maintaining the compensation rate at 80%, as recently announced by Ag Canada recently. With relation to the agro-environment, additional public investment is needed. Although little used in Canada, payment to agricultural producers for environmental goods and services encourages the adoption of beneficial practices and recognition of positive contribution. In the U.S., direct support for this represents 1% of farm cash receipts and can constitute 25% of the support paid to U.S. farmers. To achieve equivalent agri support, $650 million per year would be needed to provide Canadian farm businesses in this context. The UPA would therefore recommend and request to ensure a continuum of support and guidance over a 10-year horizon in terms of remuneration for environmental goods and services, and to fight against climate change, both in terms of adaptation to climate change and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Provide a stable and predictable budget for agro and agro-environmental research and innovation. Now, in regards to organic production, national organic standards got to be reviewed every 5 years, and Canada should not have a program that support the review work. Unlike the United States and the European Union, we could have programs in place. On the other hand, Canada could increase the number of certified businesses. Like the Americans, they had a shared cost certification program. Therefore, we request providing ongoing funding for the review and maintenance of the organic standards and offer a cost share program for organic certification. On the tax side, we'd like to see the introduction of a 30% refundable investment tax credit for the purchase of new or used equipment by farm businesses with gross annual revenues of less than $50,000. Limit the taxable capital gains on gift or low-cost sale of certain farm assets to a relative and nephew or niece. Create a personal silviculture savings and investment for Canadian forest owners. And finally, with respect to the dairy sector, we reiterate the importance of the government fulfilling its commitment made in the last budget to provide full compensation to milk producers to mitigate losses related to the CUSMA and to make no further concessions on supply management products in future trade negotiations. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Caron,
Thank you, Mr. Caron.
for your opening remarks. I know the members have many questions, and we're going to move right to them now. In our first round of questions, each party will have up to 6 minutes to ask questions. We are starting with the Conservatives. MP Lawrence has the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the witnesses for being here today and for their preparations for the committee. I'll start with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Of course, Canada is facing a labour shortage, and so as we should be always, I think it's incumbent on us as stewards of the economy to make sure, and just to do the right thing, that workers are fully incentivized for the hard work that they do. Canadians, of course, work extremely hard, some very long hours, and it's my belief that the government is taking too large a portion, and that doing things like tripling the carbon tax and increasing payroll taxes will do nothing but disincentivize work. Mr. Franco, would you care to comment?
72% of Canadians in a recent poll said that they pay too much tax. And if we want to encourage work, then we need to stop punishing work. And what we have seen is at the worst possible time, the government raise payroll taxes. So if you're making $65,000 this year, then the government is taking nearly $4,500 directly from you through your CPP NEI tax. And then you have to add on what your employer must also pay through the CPP NEI tax. So if we want to encourage more work, we should stop increasing taxes on Canadian workers.
Thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. I'm going to go now to the Business Council of Canada, and was very much intrigued by your presentation with respect to the industrial strategy. I wonder if you would just quickly characterize, and I don't expect you to have a full answer, but just an estimate of where Canada might rank in terms of, in the OECD or the G7, whichever is more convenient, in terms of capital investment, in terms of innovation and productivity.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. Well, those are the areas where we're weak. The reason why we have low productivity is we don't have enough business investments. And the reason why we don't have business investments is partly because we don't have enough large firms in the economy investing. The composition of our economy, I would argue, is too focused on consumption, on real estate, as opposed to productive sectors or advanced industries or innovative industries. And the reality for modern competitiveness is that we have to compete with other countries where R&D is intensive, where competition occurs. And if you look at tech and most sectors where R&D and STEM workers are present, this is where competition occurs. And so we have to invest and we have to be very surgical when we think about industrial strategy. As I mentioned in my remark, the U.S. just made a big move with the U.S. Chips and Science Act in the IRA, and I believe that Canada has to have a more comprehensive strategy when it comes to innovation. What we have right now is very targeted measures, program like the Strategic Innovation Fund, that are not sufficient, in my view, to compete at the global level.
And you also mentioned the regulatory environment, and I would one of my focuses is to look at the income tax and the tax regime. Where would you rank Canada's income tax and tax regime relative? Is it inducing? Is it incentivizing? Is it helping to empower Canadian innovators, or is it a barrier?
Good question again, Mr. Chair. I think when you look at budget 2017 or 2018, I'm sorry, the finance minister then announced some measures to have a level playing field with what had been announced with the Trump administration in the U.S. But now that we've seen the RA coming forward in the U.S., I do believe that on taxation and tax credits for investments, they are moving forward and they are leading us. And obviously, U.S. is the main competitor when you think about capital. I think I would characterize as us being in the middle of the pack on taxation, both on personal income tax and corporate income tax. The question, the finality is not who has the least tax possible. It's globally, do we have a competitive tax system that attracts investments? And I would argue that we could do much better on that front.
Thank you very much, and I'm inclined to agree with you there. Next, I'll jump to the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs. I think you gave some very intelligent testimony and gave some very good ideas. I, though, would like to give you a little bit of opportunity to put some context around some of those suggestions. I think it's been fairly well reported that we've seen a rise in anti-Semitism. Could you talk about the impact to some of the people in your community, and whether you agree with me that there has been a rise in anti-Semitism?
Thank you, through the chair, for the question. I think it's not a question of my subjective assessment of whether there's been a rise. The objective statistics provided by not just national agencies, but police forces across the country indicate that there's been an alarming rise. Though I hasten to add, even though the Jewish community is the single most targeted one, the increase has been pretty much across the board. And I think what that suggests is there is a normalization that has been occurring over the last number of years of speech and action that would have previously been considered marginal or unacceptable. And that is why, for example, we are strong advocates of the social media literacy campaign. Given the role that social media platforms play within society today, we think that that is an exceedingly important target of educating Canadians on what constitutes fair speech, responsible speech, and use of social media platforms versus those that abuse it in ways that serve to marginalize, to threaten, to bully, intimidate, and exclude different segments of society. For us, the experience that we go through as a Jewish community is not just about us. It's instructive about what other marginalized and at-risk communities feel, because what starts with the Jews never ends with the Jews. So we should take the statistics to heart and move prophylactically to put into place those things that are going to provide Canadians with adequate defense.
Thank you. And that's the time, but I need to inform members that the bells are ringing. We would need unanimous consent to continue up to 10 minutes before the vote, and then allow for 10 minutes for members to get back to the meeting. Clerk, if you could just kind of look the room and see if we've got thumbs up, everybody, unanimous consent, yes? Okay, so we will continue. Thank you, members. And we are now moving to the Liberals. I've got MP Baker for 6 minutes, please.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks to all the witnesses for being here today. I have questions for all of you, and I may not get to all of you, and I apologize in advance. I'd like to start with Mr. Terrazzano. Mr. Terrazzano, how would you describe the taxpayers that the Canadian Taxpayers Federation represents? Who are they?
We represent 235,000 Canadian taxpayers who support our mission to fight for lower taxes, less waste, and more government accountability.
If I heard you correctly in your exchange with Mr. Lawrence, I just want to confirm I understand that you are advocating that there be no increases to EI premiums or to CPP premiums. Is that correct? That's a yes or no question.
So what we think is that at the very least, it should have been a no-brainer for the government not to raise taxes during the middle of a pandemic when
Mr.
so many
Terrazzano,
people lost their
I have
jobs,
very limited
took
time.
pay
Mr.
cuts.
Chair,
Many people maybe even lost their
Mr.
small
Chair,
business.
could I ask you to ask the witness to allow me to
Mr. Terrazzano, the member has the floor. Go ahead, member.
I offered you the respect, Mr. Terrazzano, of listening to your testimony without interruption. Whether I agree or disagree, I'd ask you to offer me that same courtesy. So I'm asking you a question. I'd ask you a question.
Point of order. I believe
Point of order.
I believe that the witness should be given the same amount of time as the questioner, and I don't believe that was respected, Mr. Chair. And I believe that
It's not a point of order. The member Baker has the floor. Member Baker.
And actually, I did allow for exactly the same amount of time. That time passed, and then that's when I interrupted because the time had elapsed and the question was not being answered. So I'm going to ask that the question be answered, Mr. Terrazzano. It's just a question of fact. I heard you say to Mr. Lawrence that you do not support increases to EI premiums and CPP premiums. Is that correct?
The government should not have raised carbon taxes, payroll taxes, and if all that drives you to drink, the government is also taking more money from you every time you go get that bottle of Pinot to enjoy with your
Thank you very
half.
much. Your time is over. These increases in EI premiums and CPP premiums
Point of order.
Are needed to
Point of order.
Yes, point of order.
Mr. Chair, that is not an appropriate way to address, and I believe that we should be cordial and respectful. These witnesses have spent their time.
We should be cordial and respectful. I agree, but it is the member's prerogative and it is the member's time. MP Baker.
Thank you very much, and I have been cordial and respectful. So I'm just enforcing the time, as you were so concerned about, Mr. Lawrence. So the increases in premiums for EI and CPP are needed to make sure that when people lose their jobs, in the case of EI, or when people retire, when our seniors retire, that the funds are there to ensure that they can collect their pension, or in the case of EI, that they can collect EI. So the effect of not increasing those premiums with the demand for those for EI and CPP would mean that when people retire or when people lose their jobs, they would not have the funds needed to collect EI. The funds wouldn't be there, certainly to keep up with demand, their needs, but also with inflation, and that would apply to CPP as well. Are you concerned about that?
What I'm so concerned about are so many Canadians who, in the private sector, just took it on the chin for 2+ years, while the people who are supposed to be their representative gave themselves pay raise after pay raise after pay raise. And not just that, raise the carbon tax, raise payroll taxes, raise alcohol taxes, and then play word games with Canadians using magic math when the government's own independent budget watchdog shows that the cost of these tax hikes, like the carbon tax, is costing the average household hundreds of dollars this year, even after the rebates. I'm concerned with the tax hikes. I'm concerned that all of this burden is falling on those hardworking Canadians who lost their job during the pandemic, while members of Parliament gave themselves pay raises, while 300,000 bureaucrats received pay raises, while failing crown corporations gave out bonuses and pay raises during the pandemic. So I'm very concerned about the tax.
Thank you very much. I've heard you. So I hear that you're not concerned about the pensioners and the EI recipients who wouldn't receive their funds. That's what I've heard you just say. It sounds to me like the Canadian Taxpayers Federation is actually not supporting the very taxpayers who would struggle the most in an inflationary environment in the circumstance where they do retire and where they do lose their jobs. And I think that's really, really disappointing.
Well,
I'd like to move on to that wasn't a question. I'd like to move on now to Mr. Fogel. Mr. Fogel, you've raised something that I'm deeply concerned about. And you've actually raised a number of issues I'm very concerned about. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about, you talked about literacy around social media, the importance of making sure that people can properly, in my view, this is what I'm understanding from you, and you please correct me, don't let me put words in your mouth, that people understand what they're reading, know how to interpret it, know how to contribute in the most constructive and respectful way possible. Am I characterizing what you've advocated for correctly, first of all? But then also, could you talk about how can we execute that program that you're suggesting?
So I think you gave a fair characterization. Allow me, Mr. Chair, to just give an analogy. Without offering any comment, when the decision was made to legalize cannabis use, very soon it became apparent to the government that there was something that they had not anticipated, which was there are a set of concerns about safety in terms of use of cannabis, cannabis and alcohol mixtures, for example, or the different action of edible cannabis products as opposed to those that are inhaled. And they recognized that there was a need to undertake a sustained, serious, and comprehensive public campaign, education campaign, to sensitize Canadians, especially a particular demographic, not coincidentally the same one as is the highest users of social media platforms, to sensitize them to the risks and the proper use of cannabis products to ensure their safety. What we're suggesting is that the ubiquitous nature of social media today requires that we provide that same kind of sensitivity and training, that education, so that people using social media platforms are aware about what constitutes bullying. What are the code words and the messages that target individual groups and seek to marginalize them? I think that most Canadians, if they were aware that certain language or certain emojis or what have you triggered that kind of reaction, they would self-manage to ensure that they distance themselves, did not use, did not amplify, did not share those kind of messaging, because we cannot put everything in a legislative process that seeks to punish or codify social media use.
Thank you. Thank you, MP Baker. That's the time. And now we'll move to the block. And I've got MP Sainte-Marie for 6 minutes, and members 5:42 is when we will break so that everybody get out to vote and then get back. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to welcome all the witnesses this afternoon. Very interesting. We are always learning things at the Finance Committee from our witnesses. My questions are for the UPA, Mr. Caron or Mr. Tougas. Mr. Caron, thank you very much for your presentation. You've sent us a brief as well with your recommendations. We received it, and you presented them in compressed format. I am going to look at them again with you in reverse order. Your last recommendation here was no more concessions in our free trade agreements, commercial agreements, or no more attacks on the supply management system. Now, we know that Canada, Europe, and elsewhere, and the new CUSMA, what we had to trade for were sacrifice a part of the supply management. But that was understood, and it was a trade-off, a compromise. And that the government should respect its commitment of the last budget to fully compensate the dairy farmers, to compensate for the giveaways of the CUSMA. Now, can you tell us why this hasn't occurred yet? A few comments on that? Well, thank you for the question. Well, you know, there was this offer, and nothing was in the last budget by way of compensation. We hope that we will see that in the next budget. And we have to get to some understanding about who will be receiving compensation. Now, it will allow to have farms throughout Canada because of the stakes and the challenges that we're wearing now. Food security is becoming more and more important. And we have to ensure that there's availability to all Canadians throughout the country to quality product. Thank you. So we have to update that, I think, in the next few weeks. We certainly hope so. But there is a bill that's been proposed for the fall, or another implementation bill. There'll be quite a few opportunities that you might see some money this fall. If you'd like to explain us the fund for forestry owners. Now, the cycle is very, very lengthy in the forest area because a tree takes time. Yes, of course. But when the producers, timber producers, for example, try to market their goods, if they could have a savings account, when they cut the wood, of course, they can sell it. That could go into their savings account, and it could be used to reinvest or to live on. It would be sheltered for a while. I think the principle is known. It's been used elsewhere. It's just a matter of implementing it. And if we're trying to reduce greenhouse gas effect, I think forestry plays a very significant role in that with proper forestry management. Well, I hope you were able to convince the government to do that. That would be a fine measure, I believe. Another one of your recommendations, and I'll go with the bill that we had, in fact, adopted before the elections, 2021, in that summer. Business transfer to a member of your family, so that it would be less onerous to sell your farm to your son or nephew. The government refuses to give us the methodology, Revenue Canada and such, to conduct these transactions. So I think that has to go ahead after all these months. Another recommendation is to provide a limit capital gains of certain farm machinery or equipment if you sell it to a family member. So I imagine that's what you're dealing with, family farms? Yes, of course. And I think that most of our members understand full well that the costs of these assets have increased very, very much. The average dairy farm in Canada is $3 million of asset, if you will. And it's completely incomprehensible that we're not, as a family member, a parent, that there's no support. There's no support for us on that. 56% of transfer of agricultural enterprises occurs between family or related members. There were three elements to this issue. The control of the shares and the assets in percentage terms. It's very important that the parents stay there and to ensure the ongoing financial security, particularly in inflationary times. So I think this is for the sustainability of the enterprise. We're not asking for a lot of money. It's just a method where we can save our own money. Understood. The family enterprise is a known quantum in Canada, and we hope that it stays a good human scale. Now, for those who have $50,000 gross income, they need an incentive when they buy equipment. With the price of farm equipment, they need a little push to increase the productivity or adopting technology to improve productivity. When 50,000 gross revenue, that represents 40% of the farms throughout Canada, and about 83,000 farms. They contribute to the Canadian economy, and when we invest in agriculture and agri-food, we're helping to keep Canadians fed with quality products. It's very important for the rural part of Canada and for the economy as a whole. Thank you, member.
Members, just before we suspend, we're gonna go to the NDP for a couple of minutes. We're gonna suspend and then off to vote, and then we will be back and we'll then continue with the NDP at that time. And I believe MP Davies is with us in the room, clerk.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for all of your testimony. I think I'll have time for one or two questions. I'd like to address it to the Green Budget Coalition. We in the NDP believe that restructuring the Canadian economy to address the climate crisis is not only an imperative from a planetary point of view, but it's also, I think, key to positioning our economy to take advantage of the necessary transition to sustainable energy sources and others that we think will be position Canada well for the 21st century. And as you know, part of the confidence and supply agreement that we have entered into with the Liberal government is moving forward on addressing the climate crisis and creating good-paying jobs as is an important part of that. I'd like to focus on your first recommendation for advancing a zero-emissions electricity grid based on renewables. I'm wondering if you can speak a bit about the dollar amount required for this, as well as how the kinds of investment that you're suggesting will not only advance the goal of net zero, but also lead to job creation.
Thank you for the question. I'm going to turn to Tom Green with the David Suzuki Foundation to answer that.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. And I think that's an excellent way to look at this, is that these are investments that help position Canada to be the zero-emission economy of the future, to take advantage of opportunities and whatnot. And there's been various assessments of what it will cost to transition Canada's grid and to build out more renewables. That includes those done by ourselves and also by the Canadian Renewable Energy Association. So the figures that we're talking about here don't complete the transition, but they put us in a very good position by helping set us up for more transmission across the country, more sharing between regions, which really helps with the deployment of renewables, and for more deployment of renewables, and balancing the field between the very generous tax credits that are now being given to the oil and gas industry for carbon capture and storage, and much less generous tax credits that are available for renewable investments in renewable generation.
Thank you. And thank you, MP Davies. Your time will continue once we come back. Members, we are going to suspend at this time to go and vote. And hopefully everybody's back 10 minutes after the vote so that we can continue again. Thank you. We're suspended. Buddy, call the meeting back to order, and we had left off with the NDP, and they were in their questions, and they had 4+ minutes still left. MP Davies, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Green, if you could perhaps send to the committee the figure for the zero emissions electricity grid, that would be helpful to the committee. Carrying on with the Green Budget Coalition, in the more detailed overview, you mentioned creating a Pan-Canadian Grid Council. My colleague from Elmwood Transcona, who can't be here today, has certainly been a strong advocate for an east-west power grid. And in his consultations on that, one of the things that stands out as a gap in the discussions is that there seems to be no table to convene in order to have the necessary conversations to generate cooperation. Could you elaborate on how much you've allocated in your proposal to create this table, who you think would be at the table, and maybe the type of projects you'd expect to see come out of such a council?
Sure, yes. Thank you for the question. So we've allocated $50 million over 5 years to support that. And we have a second bucket of $5 million for a consultation process between provinces, territories, municipalities, utilities, Indigenous nations, and interested community neighbors. So between those two investments, the idea is to trying to get much more collaboration across the country and unlock some of the gains that are possible by better coordination and sharing of, improving the grid east to west and that kind of thing.
Thank you. So sort of continuing on that subject, the Finance Committee is also undertaking a study on fiscal federalism. And as part of that study, they heard from Seth Klein, who wrote the book, The Good War. And in that book, Mr. Klein put forward the idea of climate transfer from the federal government to provinces that are being disproportionately affected by climate change. When I think of my province of British Columbia, we've had record heat waves. We have untold damage from the forest fires and floodings. The Coquihalla Highway, a major highway going into the Lower Mainland, collapsed, which required a substantial investment of capital from government. We've just seen sort of a similar debacle on the East Coast. So I'm wondering if you think government should consider a federal climate transfer to provinces, looking both to mitigate the impacts of the climate change we're already experiencing, as well as investing in projects and training for workers that would ensure a more sustainable, resilient economy tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think I'm in your riding. I'm in Vancouver, and we've certainly experienced all these costs. And we have to recognize that as a country, the climate is impacting different areas of the country differently. We've also put in some recommendations for an adaptation strategy. There's the excellent research of the Canadian Climate Institute showing all the damages that are going to happen with climate change if we don't mitigate emissions. So I think those kind of proposals are certainly worthy of study, and that's why our recommendations in this budget proposal together are intended to put Canada on a track for lower emissions, better resilience to climate change, and better impacts on nature, and ensuring that natural capital in nature isn't eroded, but is in fact maintained so it can secure the well-being of Canadians over time.
Now, the second recommendation is around a renovation wave, and we know that modifying and upgrading buildings and homes that we already have is going to be crucial in addressing the climate crisis. We also know that upgrades usually lead to savings, as things like new windows and heating and cooling systems are more efficient. Also generates a lot of small business activity in a positive sense. In the detailed overview, you've put aside some money for no-cost deep retrofits for low-income Canadians. Can you expand on that recommendation and also maybe touch on the concept of equity and why it's important to make sure that solutions to the climate crisis aren't being gate-kept from those who can't afford it?
Should we turn to Teresa on that one?
Yes, thank you for that question. So in addition to the recommendation we make for $10 billion per year for residential buildings to cover expenditures that are beyond what households would normally do for regular maintenance, we talk about $2 billion per year for no-cost deep retrofits for low-income households of all types of tenure, householder-owned low-income as well as tenant low-income. And the reason we talk about no cost is because we know from previous work, such as that done by the Low Income Energy Network here in Ontario, those households cannot afford to put money up front to undertake these expenditures, even if they were on some type of a loan or repayment program. And so then it leaves them out of the program entirely. And many of these households are the most in need of these kinds of assistance. And in terms of equity generally, we have seen that climate is impacting vulnerable, under-resourced communities, low-income communities inequitably, because many other households can take steps to offset some of the impacts. Not all of them, depends where people are, but often they're in locations that are more prone to flooding, for example. After flooding, if they don't have remediation, they end up with mold, with asthma resulting from mold. Don't have access to cooling, for example. There's a big issue around heat deaths going on in Canada with some untoward impacts there.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, MP Davies. And members, just taking into account the time we were suspended for, we will be concluding today at 7:08. 7:08, that will be our 2 hours. We're also, members, moving into round two, our second round of questions, and we'll start with the Conservatives. I have MP Hallen up for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses for being here and contributing to this very important conversation. I want to start off by apologizing to Mr. Terrazzano for Mr. Baker's very unprofessional behavior today. I know you, Mr. Terrazzano, and the CTF do great work and represent Canadians that have been hit by this cost of living crisis caused by a lot of what Mr. Baker and his government have been doing with out of control inflationary spending. I want to give you, Mr. Terrazzano, ample time to respond to Mr. Baker without being cut off.
Well, thank you, member, with respect. And, you know, I heard something about seniors, and you know who's really getting hammered by the inflation tax? The seniors who are living on fixed income. Now, what we've seen is out-of-control spending for years. Before the pandemic, the feds were spending all-time highs, even after accounting for inflation and population growth. Then during the pandemic, the Bank of Canada printed $300 billion out of thin air. Then, the cherry on top for hardworking Canadians who are already struggling is the tax hikes. Carbon taxes up, payroll taxes up, and alcohol taxes up. And then just around the corner next year is going to be the second carbon tax coming through fuel regulations. And right in the government's own analysis of those regulations, it shows exactly who's going to be made worse off. Low and middle class Canadians, people who are already suffering from energy poverty, single mothers and seniors living on fixed incomes. And again, that's right from the government's own analysis.
Thank you, Mr. Terrazzano. I think you've raised some really important points, that it's the people on fixed incomes that are getting hit the worst. You pointed out, and it is important to note that the government did spend $100 billion even before COVID. During COVID, there was close to $500 billion spent, where almost a quarter of $1 trillion, it wasn't even, had nothing to do with COVID at all. And like you said, there's going to be the tripling of the carbon tax that's going to be coming up. Now, there's also the point that over the last 7 years, many good, energy projects were canceled by the Liberal government, and now we see a 50 to 100% increase in home heating costs because of that. Do you think it's the right time to be increasing the carbon tax, or even have a carbon tax when all we see is emissions going up?
I think it's the worst possible time. I think it should have been a no-brainer. At the very least, the government not raise taxes when so many people lost their job, when so many small businesses were worried that their savings wouldn't keep the lights on. Right now, we have people who are trying to drive from Port Hope to Richmond Hill for work who can't afford to fuel up their cars. And right around the corner is going to be winter time. And of course, the carbon tax drives up the cost to heat our homes during those cold winter months. But look, I don't think we should kid ourselves. The government knows that these tax increases are inflationary. That's the whole goal of the carbon tax. Sometimes I think that the government pats itself on the back every time it sees the big prices at the pumps. Same with the second carbon tax. The government's analysis is very clear. The second carbon tax could add up to an extra 13 cents per litre to the price of gasoline by 2030. And of course, there are no rebates with the second carbon tax.
I agree with you. When a province like mine, Alberta, there's more Albertans that have to pay out of their pocket than what they get back from the rebate. And once the carbon tax triples, a Canadian family will pay up to $2,300 out of their pocket in carbon tax. And again, we don't see emissions coming down either. And we're seeing the money coming out of Albertans' pockets. Now, going to today's tax rate increases by the Bank of Canada, what do you think this is a reaction to?
Out of control spending for years. I mean, out of control spending drives up the cost of living. So I think that's exactly what the reaction is to. But let me just get back to Alberta, because we've heard the government time and again mislead Canadians by claiming that households get more money back with their rebate. But of course, the Parliamentary Budget Officer has shown that that is magic math. My family lives in Alberta too, and there's no wonder that Albertans just voted in the equalization referendum to stop being treated like the cash cow of Confederation. Well, this year alone, the carbon tax will cost the average household in Alberta $671 even after the rebates, according to the Parliamentary Budget Officer.
Now, time and time again, we do hear the Liberal government say this is not our problem. Inflation is by some act of God. It's a world problem. But recently, we've heard the former Bank of Canada governor, and a possible Liberal leadership candidate, Mark Carney, come out and say this is a domestic issue. And the current Bank of Canada governor has said this is a homegrown issue. Do you agree with that?
Oh, I certainly agree that the government created the perfect storm for inflation, which is too many dollars chasing too few goods. We've seen tax increases here in Canada while other countries are reducing taxes. 51 other national governments have cut taxes to ease the burden of inflation or during the pandemic, including many of our peers. More than half of G7 and G20 countries cut taxes. 2/3 of OECD cut taxes. And while our government has been increasing gas taxes, Australia cut its gas tax in half. The Netherlands provided significant gas tax relief. South Korea cut its gas tax by 30%. India cut gas taxes to, quote, keep inflation low, thus helping the poor and middle classes.
Thank you, MP Hallen. That's the time, and now we'll move to the Liberals. MP Chattel for 5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Before beginning, I should mention that I've visited countries where there are no taxes or low taxes, and I don't think anyone around the table here would like to live in a country where we have no support for education and other forms of security that we require. We're proud of our employment insurance regime in Canada, and we're not going to start cutting during these difficult periods where we need this help. Tax cuts have been tried in Britain recently, and look what happened. Even economically, it didn't make any sense. We don't want to plunge into an inflationist crisis that's even worse, as they did in Britain, or a political crisis as well. So I appreciate the real suggestions for real process. Now, Mr. Caron, you proposed Mr. Touga, your colleague, Mr. Caron, mentioned earlier that when we invest in agriculture and agro-food, we invest in the pantry of all Canadians. What would you propose exactly in that regard? I was looking at the recommendation 3 to directly support agriculturalists who are providing ecological goods and services, EG+S. We've created resilient agricultural programs here, strategies as well. So are we on the right path, or should we continue elsewhere? Yes, well, thank you for the question. We recognize, of course, and acknowledge that there's been some significant money invested in the last 2 years for agriculture and the environment of agriculture in the last 2 years. we feel that there's still more required to ensure that they become sustainable. We're trying to implement ecological practices so that we minimize the impact on the environment, and we need more investment at this point. We're transforming the sector. We don't compare to what's being invested in the United States at all. We feel it's a very, very good start. We'd like to get to the next phase as quickly and effectively as possible in order to get over these challenges. Thank you, Mr. Dugas. I'd like to address my next question to the Green Budget Coalition. Should we do more for agricultural producers who are producing using green techniques? And, climate change is being felt everywhere, in farming in particular, with either droughts or floods and fires, but elsewhere in the world as well. How can we help them develop resilient farming practices? Yes, thank you very much, Madame Châtel. It's been quite a while since I've had an opportunity to debate with you in French, so I will immediately switch to English.
Nature United released a peer-reviewed study on 24 natural climate solutions that can bring down Canada's greenhouse gas emissions by the equivalent of 11% of our overall emissions by 2030. And lo and behold, we found that 11 agricultural pathways were amongst the most effective, can bring down approximately 50% of the total emissions reductions through natural pathways that we calculated. What's really interesting about these pathways is that they're available now. Farmers across Canada are starting to use them, but the uptake is nowhere near where it needs to be. The other thing that we went on to build on and did a study in partnership with Bain and Company was that farmers adopting some of these practices, while they would see declines in yields and revenues in the first couple of years, by the time you get to the third and fourth year, after a little bit of support from the government, they're seeing up to 30% increase in their revenues. At the same time, some of these practices are practices like cover cropping that reduce the amount of water that they require, nutrient management that reduces the cost in many of these products like fertilizer, which are seeing inflationary pressures as well. So you have sort of a double benefit happening where you're through these practices reducing the costs while seeing benefits to farmers' bottom lines as well as emissions reductions. So what we see that farmers really need right now is really threefold. They need incentives to make the switch. Farmers really look to the people around them to adopt new practices. So we really need to get projects off the ground, on the ground, so to speak. They need financial support to bridge that gap, as I was describing previously, and they need information and extension services. And we've seen the provinces.
Merci. And MP Châtel, yes, that's the time. And now we'll move to the block, and we have MP Lemire.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your invitation. I'd like to point out, Mr. Dugas, you had two recommendations which I found very interesting. Biological or organic agriculture with a shared cost program for certification shared with the government, and a permanent organization to promote this. Well, in Témiscamingue, a region of Quebec, it's going to become a leader of organic farming. It's probably one of the last places in the world where we find virgin territory from an organic point of view. So how can we advance towards this objective, very, very laudable objective, organic agriculture? Well, there's two things that you did mention that we had proposed. Shared cost for the certification and some incentives to assist farmers and agricultural producers transform to organic methods. We'd like to be in a position, and we're getting close in Quebec, to get to a level playing field. We don't want to be, rushing towards the bottom with our competitors here. So we'd like to increase the number of agricultural enterprises and the surface of these. What's the uptake? What's the enthusiasm to move to organic farming? How about for cereal crops? Well, there's some challenges to entry into the organic markets for cereals, for example, if it's going to be used for feedstock for cattle or dairy cattle. That's always in the background. Organic production, if you say you're organic, it has to be organic in all its senses. All the inputs have to be organic. Okay, but I hope you get the support from government you need. Thank you. Thank you, MP Lemieux.
We'll hear from the NDP, MP Davies, for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you once again to the Green Budget Coalition. Your third recommendation is delivering on Canada's land and ocean protection commitments. And I live in Vancouver, which of course is very close to the ocean. So I'm acutely aware of not only the environmental impacts, but the economic importance of tourism, of fishing, of shipping, and the importance of having clean oceans and waterways. I'm wondering if you could tell us the dollar amount you'd like the government to put towards this initiative, and maybe one or two examples of policy that you'd like to accompany that money.
Thanks very much for the question. Yeah, certainly we see a lot of economic benefits from nature protection. I can tell you a little story from the Great Bear Rainforest Agreement, where we saw the Government of Canada contribute $30 million, the province contribute a match to that. Philanthropic organizations came forward with a $60 million match. And what do we see? We see 45 new First Nations-led businesses, over 1,100 permanent jobs created. It's become the most successful driver of job creation in the region. Canada has a target of reaching 25% of conserved lands and waters by 2025, and we still have a long way to go. And so while we do have budgetary recommendations, and I can give you those numbers, what we really see is that a lot of that money is coming in the form of establishment funding, project funding, to get projects off the ground. But in order to have the confidence to engage in these projects, partners really need to see the long-term funding for stewardship over time, so that it doesn't land flat on them. So one of our key recommendations here is $1.4 billion per year in A-base funding, increasing to $2.8 billion per year by 2030-31 to support that long-term management and monitoring of terrestrial and marine protected areas. And so we've got that divided on the marine and the terrestrial front.
I don't know how much time I have left, but I'll try to get a quick one in on your recommendation.
15 seconds.
Thank you. Advancing sustainable agriculture. I'd like to hone in on the idea that Canada being a sustainable food producer and ask you a two-pronged question. Essentially, if you could outline your recommendations for how Canada can be a sustainable food supplier and how we can also be improving our risk management.
And a very concise, short answer, please.
One of the most powerful tools for risk management is the business risk management programs, which have actually been oriented more towards income stabilization. We've recently seen a commitment to a pilot to try to build in climate risk. We really need to build out those incentives for farmers to actually change behavior, but in a way that's additional. We recognize that the existing programming and funding is very, very critical for those farmers.
Great, thank you. And thank you, MP Davies. And now to the Conservatives, MP Morantz for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Terrazzano, my recollection is that back in 2019, a story came out that one of the Liberal MPs at the time had submitted to their campaign platform this idea of taxing home equity. And it became an issue in that election. And of course, the Liberals denied that they had any intention of taxing home equity. But then we found out that CMHC had actually retained an organization called Generation Squeeze, had paid them over $200,000 to study this very thing. Now, the reason I'm asking you about it is that in your brief, you make note of removing the requirement to report the sale of your home to CRA. Now, I don't know of any other non-capital asset that a Canadian citizen might sell that they would have to report to CRA other than their home. So I'm wondering if you could comment on why do you think that requirement is there?
That's a great question. I mean, if the CRA isn't going to tax it, well, why do they want to know how much you sell your home for? Are they just curious? You know, I've never known the CRA to just be curious. Now, what's so frustrating is that the Liberal Party in the last election, Mr. Trudeau, during the leaders' debate, said that they wouldn't bring in a home equity tax. So then why are taxpayers paying hundreds of thousands of dollars through a Crown corporation funding research into this home equity tax? And not just that, we dug up documents that show that staff in the Prime Minister's office met twice with the group that has been pushing the home equity tax. But not just that. We've also seen the Crown Corporation, the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, whose number one objective, according to its own website, is housing affordability for all. Well, in 2020 and 2021, Canadians couldn't afford to live in their homes or couldn't afford to buy homes. So why would that Crown Corporation then turn around and hand out nearly $60 million in pay raises and bonuses?
Thank you. Now, I wanted to talk to you about tax competitiveness has been on my mind. And I'm wondering if you have any information on where Canada stands. You know, like when major corporations look at where they're going to open their factories, do business, they look at countries in a way like a product. And one of the things they'll look at is how expensive is it going to be for our corporation, for our executives, for our employees? How much are they going to have to pay to live in a country like Canada? Where do we compare in the world to other countries on that front?
Unfortunately, among our peer nations, not good. So I have the results from the 2021 International Tax Competitive Index in front of me, and Canada ranked 20th out of 37 OECD countries on tax competitiveness, which is 2 spots worse than Canada's 2020 rank and also puts us in the bottom half of the pack among our peers. Canada ranked 23rd on business tax competitiveness. Canada ranked 27th on individual tax competitiveness, and Canada ranked 24th on property tax competitiveness. Now, the report notes, quote, some strengths of the Canadian tax system, which includes the fact that Canada, quotes, does not levy wealth, estate, or inheritance taxes.
And just on the issue of interest rates, you know, one of the things that I think it's important for us to understand is that the government racked up more debt in the last 7 years than in all of the history of our country since Confederation. And they did it, you know, essentially bragging about it, saying, well, it would be irresponsible not to borrow when interest rates are so low. But now the chickens are coming home to roost, aren't they? The interest rates are going up. Government's going to have to refinance each tranche of debt as it becomes due. What impact do you think that's going to have on our debt servicing costs? And do you think it might force the government to make some drastic decisions around further tax increases in order to continue to service our debt?
Well, interest charges next year, according to the PBO, are going to be about $42 billion, right? That's $42 billion that can't improve health care and can't stay in Canadians' pockets through lower taxes because that money is going to the bond fund managers on Bay Street. But, I mean, look, the Bank of Canada has one job, and it failed to do its one job. If you've been to a grocery store or a gas station in the last year, you know that. And even the Bank of Canada has admitted that they did not hit their inflation target. And even the Bank of Canada has admitted that they should be held accountable. Well, isn't it a funny way to hold your organization accountable than to turn around and hand out $45 million in bonuses and pay raises in 2020 and 2021?
Mr. Chair, for one last quick one, I want to ask you about the pay-as-you-go law, because I was fascinated last week to hear the Minister of Finance all of a sudden see the light and listen to what our leader has been saying now for months and months and months and months, that Canada should bring in a pay-as-you-go law. I'm wondering, from your perspective at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, how can we trust the arsonist to put out the fire when they make a promise like this?
Well, look, it's not sustainable to spend more money on everything forever. That's not a good way to try to run the finances of a nation. But look, I mean, in our budget, we're showing that you could actually balance the books with modest spending restraint, just bring back program spending back to the pre-pandemic and all-time high levels of 2018-19, even adjusted upward for inflation and population growth. So the government could balance the budget. It could find room to provide much-needed tax relief, and really it only takes modest spending restraint.
Thank you, and thank you, MP Morantz. And now we're going to hear from MP MacDonald for the Liberals to close off this round for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to move out of Canada. It's not a great place to live by the testimonies here today. So the accusations. Very interesting, but
by one testimony.
Look, we live in a pretty good place, and I may not agree with the Taxpayers Federation of Canada, but one thing we did agree on in this preamble is millions of Canadians were hurting the past 2 years, and this government stepped up. 33,000 people in my home province were out of work, just like that, blink of an eye. So I'm glad to hear that he has a little bit of compassion for those individuals. You know, the other thing is Canada ranks 23 out of 190 countries for ease of doing business by the World Bank. So, I mean, we're going in a direction that may not be perfect, but we're certainly going in the right direction. So I want to go to Mr. Asselin. Some of your comments there at the beginning. The U.S. has a very aggressive climate change plan, and they're looking at charging tariffs on non-committed importers to their country with not very good climate change plans. We're seeing the markets around the world starting to invest in businesses that do have good sustainable practices. How is this going to affect, and how important is it for Canada to identify climate change as a very important entity in investments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, there's no question that the world is moving there. So it's not about the what, but about the how. And on the how, I think what we've seen in the last few months in the U.S. is very consequential. A very surgical approach to attract private investments on clean energy in key sectors of the economy. And I think what we're lacking in Canada, I think everybody, certainly in the business community, our council has been very supportive of any effort to reduce emissions. It's a very important goal, I think, that is shared. But you also have to do it through a lens of economic competitiveness. And this is where I find that on the regulatory side, project approvals, for example, the nimbleness that it requires to move forward, I think we could do better. And no country is perfect, as you said. It's not a question of accusing anyone, but it's a question that as Team Canada, we have to do better, both on the business side and on the government side. And I think this gesture, strong direction that the U.S. just taken, requires a Canadian response, a very surgical one. I'm encouraged by what I'm seeing on EVs. I'm encouraged what I'm seeing on strategy for critical minerals, but we have to move faster than we are moving because the world is moving fast.
I want to move now to Green Budget Coalition. Your budget submissions, you contain a lot of recommendations, actually, and really good recommendations. But as you know, with budget, there's only so much funding that can go around. Can you give us perhaps 3 to 5 of your top priorities in your submission? That would you like to see government immediate expedition on it or expedite on it?
Sure. I mean, I'll just turn to the 5 things that we have highlighted on the cover of our document. And I think in this submission, which I realized you may have only gotten yesterday, but it's around zero investments in zero emissions electricity, in the renovation wave, building energy efficiency, land and ocean protection, long permanent funding to protect lands and oceans across Canada, sustainable agriculture, working in partners with farmers to make Canadian agriculture more sustainable and more environmentally beneficial, and investing in an Office of Environmental Justice and ensuring that a portion of all clean energy and climate funds go to disadvantaged communities?
Through Fiona on Prince Edward Island, and the farmers were hit extremely hard. And I was asking the Federation of Agriculture the day before yesterday in regards to, we hear about the investments and how we should be investing in now, but how do you invest in the future? And the second part of this is too, and you talked about cover crops. Are the farmers being evaluated appropriately scientifically on carbon capture, on what they're doing?
Around how we invest in the future.
Yeah, thanks for the occasion. I mean, you were talking previously about competitiveness with the U.S., where we've just seen quite a substantial investment in sustainable and climate positive and nature positive agricultural practices. As I was starting to say previously, one of the biggest challenges that we have in Canada is data harmonization. Data harmonization between ECCC, between Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, between StatsCan. Monitoring, reporting, and verification at the farm and field level. We need that granular data. That is the role of the federal central government, so that farmers can report that, so they can speak to, so that the financiers can speak to the markets, so that we can report competitiveness on carbon emissions. Right now, that's very, very difficult. We've got a number of different recommendations that are about how we can work through more of a multi-stakeholder lens to support farmers. We need researchers and universities working on this. We need, as I say, extension services, which is the on-farm education. Previously was the role of the province, still is in Quebec, but then has shifted over to more of a corporate lens. We need.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. And members, witnesses. So I think we have an opportunity here to get through a third round, but we are going to have to just curtail it a little bit. So we're going to just take 1 minute off of members' question time for each of the 5 minutes, and then the 2.5 will be curtailed down to 2 minutes. So we're starting with the Conservatives for 4 minutes. I have MP Chambers for 4 minutes, please.
Thank you much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to go back to Mr. Asselin for a moment. Mr. Asselin, what is happening with government revenues right now?
Well, they are rising fast, mostly because of inflation and because of commodity prices in global markets.
Right. And so I know you've written about this previously, because in last budget, Budget 22, the government was also seeing some very significant unexpected revenues then, and we're continuing to see incredibly significant unexpected revenues now. About over 5 years, you're looking at like 150 billion plus. In your recommendation, what do you think the government should spend these unexpected revenues on?
Well, I don't think they should spend it, to be honest. I think given what we have been through in the last few years, all the surpluses with these rising revenues, then they are not surpluses, but all the unexpected revenue should go towards deficit reduction. I think what is important is not just quantity of spending, but quality of spending. And on investments, on industrial strategy, there are plenty of current buckets we could reallocate more surgically, I would say, more intentionally, to have a good industrial strategy. So it's not just a matter of quantum. But I would agree with the premise that these unexpected revenues should not be spent.
Thank you. And just one final question. Do you we've seen, as you mentioned, different priorities. The government, if you compare, let's set aside all the COVID spending for a moment, but if you compare total annual spending pre-COVID versus the total annual spending now, that's a 25% increase this year that's projected versus the year before COVID. Would you call that, could you characterize that as fiscal restraint?
I would not. I would say that objectively we're still what I would characterize as expansionary fiscal policy. Is about 140 billion more spending that we are doing at the federal level that from pre-pandemic levels. Now, not all this spending is unwarranted. I think reasonable debate can happen on each of these measures that were not COVID related. For example, I think there's a lot of merit to childcare spending, but I would agree that overall there was an overstimulation in the last few budgets.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Fogel, just about 30 seconds or 40 seconds left. Do you believe there's a double standard with respect to hate that we see against certain groups in this country, and how that also compares to the hate we see in anti-Semitism and how it's treated or how it's discussed or addressed?
I think different forms of hate are understood differently. And so there isn't a level playing field that way. There are those that are very obvious. There are those that are less obvious. So marginalized communities within sort of the BIPOC basket, it is self-evident that they are experiencing some very real challenges and discrimination. Look at a Jew who typically looks white, and you have a perception of Jews as being successful and being part of white privileged, if we can use woke terminology. And for many, it doesn't satisfy the criteria of discriminated or marginalized communities. So education is an important part.
Thank you. Thank you, MP Chambers. And now to the Liberals, MP Zarowitz for 4 minutes, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank all the presenters for their presentation. I'll start off with Mr. Aslan. Mr. Aslan, you have suggested that we have a new fiscal anchor, 10% of debt servicing. Has that ever been an anchor for Canada ever in the past?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a very good question. I don't believe so.
And does any other country have that as a fiscal anchor?
I do not believe so. And just to be clear about everyone, what the fiscal anchor is really a guardrail for the finance minister to say no to some colleagues or to some caucus members. It's not an official thing that government has. So it's a bit of a notional concept when we think about fiscal anchor.
Thank you. I think most people see it as an outside-looking thing as opposed to an inside-looking thing, but I appreciate you clarifying that. Then you moved on to an industrial strategy where you said it would take too long for you to run through the whole thing. You've only highlighted 3 key areas. Could you kindly submit your full sort of submission to us? That would be really helpful. Would that be possible?
With pleasure, absolutely.
Before I ask you a few questions about the industrial policy, one of the key things we have heard very clearly from the the Business Council of Canada is your support for interprovincial trade barriers to come down into harmonized regulations, and really being and fundamentally believing that that would be a low cost or no cost, but a huge gain for our economic growth. Do you still believe that?
Absolutely, we do.
Do you think that should be a key priority for us?
Yes, it requires a lot of political leadership, both at the federal level and provincial level, I believe.
Okay, I just want to make sure that continued to be a priority. I call it national friendshoring, something that we should be doing nationally here. In terms of, I think you talked a little bit about business investment and why we don't have that. What would be specific recommendations that the Business Council of Canada has for what specific recommendations do you have for government to stimulate business investment in Canada?
So I think if it was, it's a great question. I appreciate it. But if it was that simple, I think we would have solved that problem. So it's an ecosystem issue. Part of it is, as I said, a lack of scale from our business. Our ratio of SMEs versus large firm is very high compared to the U.S. And in fact, the U.S. has three times more large firms than we do. And then the composition of our economy. But I would say it's a question of the most important thing, if you'd ask our CEOs, would be regulatory predictability. So in other words, the confidence that people, private actors have, that the government has clear rules for investments and they will follow through, and that it will be stable and sustainable going forward. I think that's the most important thing.
Well, if you have, and again, we're running out of time, but if you have any clear, if you can articulate what some of those clear rules might be that you think we should look at urgently, I'd very much appreciate to look at it. There are many.
Well, just to mention, if I may.
Sure.
I mean, Minister Freeland laid it out in her Brookings Institution's speech that she mentioned that Canada was open to fast track some energy projects under certain criteria. I think it would be very welcome if the government could follow through on that and preside and present to investors and to the public, to Canadians, what this would entail going forward.
Thank you, and thank you, MP Zerowitz. Now to the block for 2 minutes, MP Lemire.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to continue with the UPA witness, Mr. Tougas. One of your recommendations deals with a stable and foreseeable this support in innovation, which is interesting because at Notre Dame du Nord we have some good innovative research going on. They're looking to build a subsidy or a branch plant, if you will, for forestry investment. Do you think that this support would help ICAT, which is the organization, to establish itself there, and therefore would be a member of the great circle of centers of research? Well, I think it's an excellent way of supporting this sector. We're looking at living laboratories as well to conduct tests and trial runs and obtain information on various methodologies. And this is one of the ways of doing it. Thank you. Another problematic issue for agriculturalists is the excise tax. Now, in some cases, there are various flavoring agents added to cheeses and other products, and would this have any consequence? Well, if it was apple or maple, we'd like to see that added to others, soft fruit, sake, other alcohols that use, that we use cranberry and blueberries to create potable liqueurs. And I think other than honey and apples, we could benefit from that.
Oh, not Blake. Sorry, I apologize, MP Davies.
Thank you. He's much taller. Mr. Asselin, you, I think, touched on the concept of Canada needing a national industrial strategy. The New Democrats have been calling for several decades, actually, for a national industrial strategy. I'm wondering, in the time remaining, if you could give us your thoughts on what the key elements of a national industrial strategy should be.
So very briefly, thank you for the question. Talent is key. We have to ramp up economic immigration to make sure we have the talent we need, given our aging demographics in Canada. Secondly, I think we have to do much better on the R&D side, translating R&D, applied R&D, industrial R&D into the economy. We don't have institutions. We don't have the architecture that the U.S. has on defense with DARPA, with NASA on defense, on space, ARPA-E now with energy. The NRC is a good institution, but one that has been in place since the 50s that has not renewed his mandate. So the R&D commercialization aspect is really, really important, one we've been struggling with. And then I would say pick some lanes, as the US just did on competitive sectors of the future. We have quantum, AI, we have some strength in this country, critical minerals, EVs. Let's move forward on ag tech, biotech, clean tech. But let's pick some lanes and let's be very intentional and deliberate on what we want to accomplish. The outcome in an industrial strategy, in my opinion, is higher productivity, so that we can have better living standards for all Canadians.
Thank you. And thank you, MP Davies. And now to the Conservatives for 4 minutes. MP Lawrence, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. This will be the last opportunity I get to chat with you. I'll start out with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. I just want to, of course, climate change is a very real concern. But my challenge with some of these Liberal policies, one is they haven't hit once the emission targets. But my second concern is that as they increase the burden on taxpayers, on companies, on individuals, and on corporations, it gives them less ability to innovate, to be more sustainable, to embrace technologies that are coming out, such as carbon capture. Could you comment on that, whether you would agree with that?
Well, I think making it more expensive for people to fuel up on their way to work is a tax plan, not an environmental plan. And I think many Canadians right now are struggling, have been struggling through 2 years of the pandemic, are struggling now with high inflation. And I think we also need to look around the world and what other countries are doing. We saw Australia cut its gas tax in half, South Korea providing gas tax relief, Germany providing gas tax relief. I mentioned the United Kingdom providing gas tax relief. And immediately the government could hold a press conference and immediately help save drivers about $20 every time they fuel up their minivan at the pumps. I mean, they can save drivers between 18 and 30 cents per liter by scrapping or suspending federal gas taxes.
Of course, part of your mandate would be to examine tax policy and the equity and the fairness of it. So one thing that's always struck me about it is that, I never understood the rationale. In fact, when I had the Ministry of Finance, they just said because it's easier, which seems such a wrong answer. And that was the charging of GST on the carbon tax. That makes no sense from a tax policy perspective, from an equity perspective, or really any perspective other than, as the Ministry of Finance just said, it's easier. What's your thoughts on that?
The tax on tax is completely unfair, and as inflation increases, Canadians are paying more because of the tax on tax. When fuel goes up, the tax on tax costs Canadian more. When the carbon tax increase, the tax on tax costs Canadians more. And, you know, I've spent a lot of my time talking about the carbon tax hike after carbon tax hike after carbon tax hike during the middle of the pandemic. But there's also going to be a second carbon tax coming through fuel regulations. And this one also has no rebate. And the government's own analysis has shown that it could cost another up to 13 cents per liter to the price of gasoline by 2030.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm just going to go to the Business Council of Canada, Mr. Aslan. I just wanted to give you a little bit of opportunity. I was very much intrigued by many of your comments. I thought they were terrific. Are there specific recommendations, maybe you can even just point to them, with respect to tax policy where maybe we could emulate some of the things the U.S. has done otherwise to really spur on innovation and productivity in our country, as you and I agree that currently it's weak right now?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've had the SR&ED tax credit for a long time. I think it's on focus. I think there's a huge imbalance between large firm and small firms. It goes towards, unfortunately, rewarding more small firms who don't really do R&D at scale. I would say reforming SR&ED would be an important aspect in terms of tax credit because it's a big tax expenditure of about at least $3 billion a year. And then I think you have to be very surgical on sectors where you need to focus on EVs, on critical minerals to spur investments. Accelerated initiatives on capital are very important. I would recommend we continue this from an ongoing basis. Anything really that attracts capital is important.
Thank you.
So I think the issue is focus as opposed to broad-based.
Thank you, and thank you, MP Lawrence. And to just conclude and finish off our third round, we'll have the Liberals. I've got MP Baker up for 4 minutes, please.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Fogel, I'd love to come back to you if we could, and I want to continue when you and I had an exchange earlier. I had asked you about some of the points you had raised around literacy, social media literacy. So I'm wondering if you could take a moment or two and just expand on what you were saying. I think we kind of had to end our conversation, but tell us a little bit more about how we would execute, how do we establish social media literacy in Canada.
So I think we had to cut it early because I talk too much. So I'll try. I'll try to be a little more succinct. I'm not the expert in education. What I do know is that when the majority of Canadians are engaged in an activity without an appreciation for what the potential consequences are, it leads to challenges. When people better understand and appreciate the potency of the tool or the instrument that they're using, they express greater responsibility in using it. The proposal for a social media literacy campaign is to assist Canadians and provide them with insight in unpacking the danger spots in the use of social media. I don't pretend to understand. People of my generation are not as fluent with social media as our children and those who are young and immersed in it. But there are traps. We know that there are some serious concerns about the seductive nature of social media lures by those who have really malicious intent. And similarly, those who promote hateful views and incitement to hate and violence have taken to using social media because it's much safer. We have to equip people, especially young people, with the knowledge and understanding to be able to identify it, to step back from participating in it, and to flag it for both the social media platforms as well as various public agencies so that it can be addressed in an effective way.
Thank you very much for that. One of the things that I'm concerned about is when it comes to social media, and I'd like to hear your reaction to this, is that you talked about how social media is used to incite violence, for example, or incite hatred. But one of the when I think about anti-Semitism, when I think of hate, I also think that the foundation for that is often in misinformation. Do you agree with that? Please tell me if you agree with that. Because, and if you do, why don't you answer that question and I'll come back to you with my follow-up.
You'll be within the answer to finish up the session, MP Baker.
So I think that, generally speaking, I do share that same perspective. I think that the ratio of 20% who have malice, 80% who simply don't know, is probably too true with respect to the whole range of social engagement and interaction, which means that we have a great opportunity to educate and teach people, not in a coercive way, but in a way that liberates them and allows them to be empowered to distinguish between good and bad.
Thank you, MP Baker. Thank you, Mr. Fogel, and thank you to all our witnesses on behalf of the entire Finance Committee. We want to thank you for your testimony, for the many answers that you have provided our committee in this pre-budget consultation that will help inform our budget 2023. So we appreciate it, and we wish you a terrific evening. Thank you.
Merci de votre accueil. Merci aux interprètes.
Member, shall we adjourn?